Sarah Mitchell looked at the clock on her car dashboard. It was 6:30 in the evening. She was tired after a long day at the hospital where she worked as an administrator. All she wanted was to get home to her family. The road was quiet as she drove through the suburban neighborhood. Most people were already home having dinner. Sarah had been driving this same route for 3 years. She knew every turn and every street sign. She was a careful driver who always followed the speed limit. She had never gotten a ticket in her entire life. Her car was a blue sedan that she kept clean and well-maintained. Everything about her drive home seemed normal. The first sign of trouble came when she noticed bright flashing lights in her rearview mirror. Blue and red lights reflected off her mirror, making her squint. A police car was behind her with its emergency lights on. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She looked down at her speedometer. She was driving exactly 25 miles per hour in a 25 mph zone. She had not done anything wrong. Sarah pulled her car over to the side of the road. She turned off the engine and placed her hands on the steering wheel, where the officers could see them. This was something her father had taught her when she first learned to drive. He had told her to always keep her hands visible during police stops. She took a deep breath and waited. 2 police officers got out of their patrol car. The first officer was tall and heavy with a thick mustache. His name tag read Johnson. The second officer was shorter and younger. His name tag said Martinez. Both men walked toward her car with serious expressions on their faces. Officer Johnson came to her driver's side window while Officer Martinez stood near the passenger side. Sarah rolled down her window and tried to smile politely. "Good evening, officers," she said in a calm voice. "Is there a problem?" Officer Johnson did not smile back. His face was hard and unfriendly. "License and registration," he demanded, without explaining why he had stopped her. Sarah reached slowly for her purse. She made sure to move carefully so the officers would not think she was reaching for anything dangerous. "May I ask why you stopped me?" she asked as she pulled out her driver's license. "I was driving the speed limit and following all traffic laws. Just give me your license," Officer Johnson said in a harsh tone. He seemed annoyed that she had asked a question. Sarah handed him her license and registration. Her hands were steady, but inside she felt nervous. She had done nothing wrong, but the officer's attitude made her uncomfortable. She watched as he looked at her documents with a frown. "Step out of the vehicle," Officer Johnson ordered suddenly. Sarah was confused. "I'm sorry, but why do I need to get out? What did I do wrong?" "Your car matches the description of a vehicle involved in a robbery," Officer Johnson claimed. "We need to check it out." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "A robbery? Officer, I think there's been a mistake. I've been at work all day at Memorial Hospital. I'm just driving home. What kind of car are you looking for?" Officer Johnson's face grew red with anger. "Are you questioning me? I said get out of the car, now!" Sarah knew her rights. She had never been in trouble with the police before, but she had watched the news. She knew that citizens had the right to ask questions during police stops. "Officer, I'm happy to cooperate, but I would like to know what robbery you're talking about. What was the description of the car you're looking for?" "Ma'am, you need to step out of the vehicle right now." Officer Martinez spoke for the first time. His voice was not as harsh as his partner's, but he still sounded serious. Sarah looked around the quiet street. A few neighbors had come out of their houses to see what was happening. Some were standing on their porches watching. Others were walking their dogs but had stopped to look. The attention made Sarah feel embarrassed and worried. "Officers, I understand. You have a job to do. Sarah said calmly. "But I need to know why I'm being asked to leave my car. I have rights as a citizen. Can you please tell me what this robbery was about and what kind of car the suspect was driving?" This seemed to make Officer Johnson even more angry. His face turned a deeper shade of red, and his voice got louder. "Lady, you're being difficult. When a police officer gives you an order, you follow it. No questions asked." Sarah felt her patience wearing thin, but she tried to stay calm. She was a professional woman who dealt with difficult situations at the hospital every day. She knew how to keep her cool under pressure. "Officer Johnson, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm simply asking for information that I have a right to know. If my car matches a suspect description, I should be able to hear what that description is." More neighbors were gathering now. An elderly man across the street had come out to check his mailbox, but was obviously listening to the conversation. A woman walking her dog had stopped completely and was watching with concern. Some people were even taking out their phones, though. Sarah could not tell if they were recording or just getting ready to call someone. Officer Johnson looked at the growing crowd and seemed to get more frustrated. "All right, that's enough. You're being non-compliant. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Sarah's mouth dropped open in shock. "What? Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I answered your questions. I gave you my license and registration. I just asked about the robbery description. That's not illegal. Turn around now, or we'll turn you around," Officer Johnson threatened. Sarah looked at Officer Martinez, hoping he might be more reasonable. "Officer Martinez, is this really necessary? I'm cooperating. I just want to understand what's happening. Officer..." Martinez looked uncomfortable but did not speak up against his partner. He kept his hand near his radio and watched Sarah carefully. The situation was getting out of control fast. Sarah realized that asking reasonable questions was somehow being seen as resistance by Officer Johnson. She had heard stories like this before, but she never thought it would happen to her. She was a respectable professional with no criminal record. She paid her taxes and volunteered at her church. She had never even gotten a parking ticket. But as she looked at Officer Johnson's angry face and felt the eyes of her neighbors watching, Sarah realized that none of those things mattered right now. Something was going very wrong, and she was powerless to stop it. The simple drive home from work was turning into a nightmare, and she had no idea how it would end. The evening air felt cold against her skin as she sat in her car, unsure of what would happen next. She thought about her husband, Marcus, waiting for her at home. She thought about her children who would be wondering where she was. Most of all, she wondered how a routine traffic stop had turned into this confrontation when she had done absolutely nothing wrong. Sarah sat in her car for a few more seconds, hoping the situation would somehow get better. She looked at Officer Johnson's face and realized he was not going to change his mind. His jaw was set and his eyes were hard. Behind him, Officer Martinez stood ready to help his partner. Sarah knew she had no choice but to get out of the car. "Okay, I'm getting out," Sarah said slowly. She opened her car door and stepped onto the pavement. Her legs felt shaky, but she tried to stand straight and keep her dignity. "I'm cooperating, but I still don't understand why this is happening." Officer Johnson immediately grabbed her arm roughly. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," he ordered. Sarah pulled her arm away instinctively. The grab had hurt her, and she was not expecting such rough treatment. "Officer, please don't handle me so roughly. I said I would cooperate." "Don't resist," Officer Johnson shouted, even though Sarah was not fighting him. He grabbed both of her arms and spun her around to face her car. The force made her stumble, and she had to put her hands on the hood of her car to keep from falling. I'm not resisting, Sarah said firmly. But you're being unnecessarily rough with me. I haven't done anything to deserve this treatment. Officer Johnson pulled Sarah's arms behind her back and snapped handcuffs on her wrists. The metal was cold and tight against her skin. The handcuffs were so tight that they pinched her wrists and made her fingers start to tingle. Sarah had never been handcuffed before. The feeling was humiliating and frightening. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Johnson began reading, her Miranda rights in a bored voice, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Wait," Sarah interrupted. "What are you arresting me for? You still haven't told me what I did wrong." Officer Johnson continued reading the rights without answering her question. Officer Martinez opened the back door of the police car and gestured for Sarah to get in. The back seat was hard plastic with a metal screen separating it from the front. It smelled like cleaning chemicals and something else unpleasant that Sarah did not want to think about. By now, more neighbors had gathered on the street. Mrs. Patterson from across the street was standing on her porch with her phone in her hand. The teenager next door was recording everything with his phone. An older man Sarah did not recognize was walking his dog but had stopped to watch. Everyone seemed shocked by what they were seeing. Sarah felt embarrassed and ashamed, even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. She was a respected member of this community. She had lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. Her neighbors knew her as a quiet, law-abiding person who kept her yard neat and always waved hello. Now they were watching her get arrested like a common criminal. "Can someone please call my husband?" Sarah called out to her neighbors before Officer Johnson could stop her. "Tell him what's happening. Tell him they arrested Sarah Mitchell from 425 Oak Street. Get in the car," Officer Johnson said roughly, pushing her toward the open door. Sarah had to duck her head and slide awkwardly into the back seat with her hands cuffed behind her. The position was uncomfortable and made her back ache immediately. The door slammed shut with a loud bang that made her jump. Through the window, Sarah watched as Officer Johnson and Officer Martinez went back to search her car. They opened all the doors and started going through her belongings. Officer Johnson pulled out her purse and dumped everything onto the front seat. Her wallet, keys, phone, and other personal items scattered everywhere. "You can't search my car." "Without a warrant," Sarah called out, but the thick glass and metal screen made it hard for them to hear her. Even if they could hear her, they were ignoring her completely. Officer Martinez opened her glove compartment and pulled out her car registration, insurance papers, and a small flashlight. He looked through everything carefully, as if he expected to find something suspicious. Officer Johnson was going through her trunk, moving her gym bag and groceries around. Sarah felt helpless watching them invade her privacy. These were her personal belongings, and they were treating them like garbage. She had nothing to hide, but that did not make the search any less humiliating. She thought about all the neighbors watching and wondered what they must think of her. The search went on for 20 minutes. Officer Johnson looked frustrated because he was not finding anything illegal or suspicious. Sarah's car was clean and well organized. There were no drugs, weapons, or stolen items. There was nothing that would justify the arrest or the search. Finally, Officer Johnson came back to the police car. He got in the driver's seat and looked at Sarah in the rearview mirror. "What's your husband's name?" he asked. "Marcus Mitchell," Sarah answered. "Why do you want to know?" Officer Johnson wrote something in his notebook but did not answer her question. Officer Martinez got in the passenger seat and closed his door. He looked uncomfortable and kept glancing back at Sarah. "Where are you taking me?" Sarah asked. "Downtown." "To the station," Officer Johnson replied. You'll be processed and then you can make your phone call. Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped this would all be cleared up quickly, but now it seemed like it was going to get worse before it got better. She thought about her children at home. They would be wondering where she was. She thought about Marcus, who would be worried when she did not come home from work on time. As the police car pulled away from the curb, Sarah looked back at her own car, sitting empty on the side of the road. Her purse was still scattered across the front seat, and the doors were still open. She wondered if her car would be safe, or if someone would steal her belongings. The ride to the police station was the longest 15 minutes of Sarah's life. Officer Johnson drove in silence while Officer Martinez fiddled with the radio. Sarah tried to think about what had gone wrong. She had been polite and cooperative. She had followed all traffic laws. She had asked reasonable questions about her rights. None of that seemed to matter. The handcuffs were cutting into her wrists, and her shoulders ached from having her arms pulled behind her back for so long. Every bump in the road made the metal dig deeper into her skin. She tried to shift position to get more comfortable, but there was no good way to sit with her hands cuffed behind her. When they arrived at the police station, Sarah saw a building she had driven past many times but never thought she would enter as a prisoner. The building was old and gray with small windows and thick walls. It looked like a place where hope went to die. Officer Johnson parked the car and came around to open Sarah's door. "Watch your head," he said, but his voice was not kind. It was just procedure. Sarah struggled to get out of the car gracefully with her hands still cuffed. Officer Martinez helped guide her by the arm, but his touch was firm and businesslike. Together, the two officers walked Sarah up the steps to the front door of the police station. As they entered the building, Sarah felt like she was entering a different world. The fluorescent lights were bright and harsh. The floors were polished, concrete that echoed with every footstep. Everything smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Sarah knew that her real fight was just beginning. She needed to make her phone call to Marcus. She needed to find out what she was actually being charged with. Most importantly, she needed to find a way to prove her innocence and get this nightmare to end. Inside the police station, Sarah was led to a processing area with bright fluorescent lights and metal benches. The walls were painted a dull green color that reminded her of old hospitals. Several other officers were sitting at desks, typing reports and drinking coffee. Some of them looked up when Sarah walked in, but most went back to their work without much interest. Officer Johnson guided Sarah to a wooden chair next to a desk. "Sit here," he told her. The handcuffs were still tight around her wrists, making her hands feel numb. She had been wearing them for almost an hour now, and the metal had rubbed raw spots on her skin. A female officer with short gray hair approached them. Her name tag read Sergeant Davis. She looked at Sarah with curious eyes, then turned to Officer Johnson. "What do we have here?" she asked. "Suspect in the downtown robbery," Officer Johnson replied. "Vehicle matched the description. She was being non-compliant during the stop." Sarah felt anger rise in her chest. "That's not true," she said firmly. "I asked reasonable questions about my rights. I cooperated with everything you asked me to do." Sergeant Davis raised an eyebrow and looked at Officer Johnson. "What exactly did she do that was non-compliant?" Officer Johnson shifted uncomfortably. "She kept questioning our authority, asking about the robbery details, being difficult." "Asking questions isn't illegal, Johnson," Sergeant Davis said with a slight frown. "What was the description of the suspect vehicle again?" Sarah watched as Officer Johnson fumbled with his notebook. He flipped through several pages before finding what he was looking for. Blue sedan, license plate starting with J, he read. My license plate starts with M, Sarah said immediately. It's clearly visible on my car. Anyone can see that. Sergeant Davis looked at Officer Johnson with growing concern. Did you check the license plate before making the arrest? Well, it was dark and hard to see, Officer Johnson said defensively. The car color was a match. There are thousands of blue sedans in this city, Sergeant Davis replied. She turned to Sarah. Ma'am, what's your name? Sarah Mitchell. I work at Memorial Hospital as an administrator. I was just driving home from work when these officers stopped me for no reason. Sergeant Davis wrote down Sarah's information. Have you ever been arrested before? No, never. I don't even have any traffic tickets. This is all a terrible mistake. The sergeant looked at Officer Johnson again. Where did this robbery take place? Downtown on 5th Street, Officer Johnson answered. And where did you stop, Mrs. Mitchell? Oak Street in the Riverside neighborhood. Sergeant Davis shook her head. That's 8 miles away from the robbery scene. Why would a robbery suspect drive 8 miles into a quiet residential neighborhood? Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Finally, someone was asking the right questions. Someone was using common sense instead of just following Officer Johnson's story. I need to make my phone call, Sarah said to Sergeant Davis. I've been asking for over an hour, and they keep ignoring me. Of course, Sergeant Davis replied. That's your right. She gave Officer Johnson a stern look. Why hasn't she been allowed to make her call yet? Officer Johnson mumbled something about paperwork and procedures, but Sergeant Davis was already leading Sarah to a phone on the wall. I'll remove the handcuffs so you can dial, she said kindly. The relief Sarah felt when the handcuffs came. Off was enormous. Her wrists were red and sore, and her hands tingled as blood flow returned to her fingers. She rubbed her wrists gently and tried to work feeling back into her hands. Sarah picked up the phone and dialed her home number. The phone rang 3 times before she heard Marcus's familiar voice. Hello? Marcus, it's me, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. I need your help. I've been arrested. What? Sarah, what happened? Are you hurt? I'm okay, but Marcus, this is serious. I was driving home from work when 2 officers stopped me. They claimed my car matched a robbery suspect, but they arrested me for asking questions about it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Sarah could practically hear him thinking. Her husband was always calm in crisis situations. It was one of the things that made him so good at his job. What are the officers' names? Marcus asked. Johnson and Martinez. Marcus, they didn't have any real reason to arrest me. My license plate doesn't even match what they said they were looking for. Okay, listen carefully, Marcus said. Don't say anything else to anyone until I get there. What station are you at? The downtown station on Main Street. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah, I love you. Everything is going to be okay. I love you too. But Marcus, there's something else you should know. I need to speak to the arresting officers. Can you ask them to come to the phone? Marcus paused again. Why do you want me to talk to them? Just trust me. Please ask Officer Johnson to come to the phone. Sarah turned to Sergeant Davis, who had been listening to the conversation. Could you please ask Officer Johnson to speak to my husband? It's important. Sergeant Davis called across the room. Johnson, come here. The suspect's husband wants to talk to you. Officer Johnson walked over with a confused expression. He was probably wondering why anyone would want to talk to the husband of someone they had just arrested. Sarah handed him the phone. This is Officer Johnson, he said into the receiver. Sarah watched Officer Johnson's face carefully. At first, he looked bored and annoyed. Then, as Marcus spoke, his expression began to change. His eyes widened slightly, and the color started to drain from his face. Yes, sir. Officer Johnson said, his voice much more respectful than it had been all evening. I understand. There was a long pause as Marcus spoke on the other end of the line. Officer Johnson's face grew pale, and he started to sweat. He kept nodding, even though Marcus could not see him. Yes, sir. I'll stay here until you arrive, Officer Johnson said. No, sir. We haven't processed her yet. Officer Johnson handed the phone back to Sarah with a shaky hand. Your husband wants to talk to you again, he said quietly. Sarah, I'm on my way, Marcus said. Don't worry about anything. This situation is about to change very quickly. What did you tell him? Sarah asked. He looks like he's seen a ghost. Marcus chuckled softly. I told him exactly who I am and what I do for a living. I think Officer Johnson is starting to realize he made a very big mistake tonight. After Sarah hung up the phone, Officer Johnson walked quickly over to Officer Martinez. Sarah could see them having a whispered conversation. Officer Martinez's face also went pale when Johnson told him whatever Marcus had said. Sergeant Davis put the handcuffs back on Sarah, but much more, gently this time. Your husband is on his way, she said. Would you like some water while you wait? Yes, please, Sarah replied. Can you tell me what my husband said to Officer Johnson? He looks terrified. Sergeant Davis glanced over at the two officers who were now standing by themselves looking very worried. I don't know what was said, but I've never seen Johnson look so nervous. Your husband must be someone important. Sarah smiled for the first time all evening. You could say that. As they waited for Marcus to arrive, Sarah watched Officer Johnson pace back and forth. He kept checking his watch and looking toward the door. Officer Martinez was sitting at a desk, staring at his hands. Both men looked like they were waiting for bad news. Sarah did not know exactly what Marcus had told them, but she knew it was going to change everything. Her husband was not just anyone. He was someone who had the power to make their lives very difficult if they had done something wrong, and based on everything that had happened tonight, they had definitely done something wrong. The 20 minutes felt like hours, but finally Sarah heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Marcus was here, and she knew that her nightmare was about to become Officer Johnson's worst fear. Marcus Mitchell walked into the police station with the confidence of a man who belonged there. He was tall and well-dressed, wearing a dark suit and tie even though it was evening. His badge was clipped to his belt, and his identification was already in his hand. Everyone in the room could tell immediately that he was someone important. Marcus worked for the city's Internal Affairs Division. His job was to investigate police officers who broke the rules or violated people's rights. He had been doing this work for 15 years, and he was very good at it. Police officers throughout the city knew his name and respected his authority. I'm Marcus Mitchell, Internal Affairs, he announced to the room. I'm here about the arrest of my wife, Sarah Mitchell. Sergeant Davis stood up quickly. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Sergeant Davis. Your wife is right over here. Marcus walked over to Sarah and gently touched her shoulder. Are you okay? He asked softly. I'm fine now that you're here, Sarah replied. But Marcus, what they did tonight was wrong. They had no reason to arrest me. Marcus looked at the handcuffs on his wife's wrists and his jaw tightened. He turned to Sergeant Davis. Why is my wife still in handcuffs? What are the charges against her? Well, sir, Sergeant Davis began, looking uncomfortable. Officers, Johnson and Martinez arrested her in connection with a robbery. But I have to say, sir, some things about this arrest don't seem right to me. Marcus nodded. I want to speak with the arresting officers immediately, and I want my wife released from those handcuffs right now. Sergeant Davis quickly removed Sarah's handcuffs. Officer Johnson and Officer Martinez approached slowly, both looking like they wished they could be anywhere else in the world. "Officers," Marcus said in a calm but firm voice, "I need you to explain to me exactly why you arrested my wife tonight." Officer Johnson cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we got a call about a robbery on 5th Street. The suspect was driving a blue sedan with a license plate starting with J. We saw your wife driving a blue sedan and made the stop." "Did you check her license plate before making the arrest?" Marcus asked. "It was dark, sir. Hard to see clearly." Marcus looked at Officer Martinez. "What did you observe during this stop?" Officer Martinez looked at his partner, then back at Marcus. "Sir, your wife was asking a lot of questions. She seemed uncooperative." "What kind of questions?" "She wanted to know details about the robbery. She kept asking about the suspect description." Marcus nodded slowly. "So, let me understand this. My wife, a law-abiding citizen with no criminal record, asked to know why she was being stopped. And you considered this uncooperative behavior?" Both officers remained silent. "I want to see the incident report for the original robbery," Marcus continued. "I also want to review any body camera footage from tonight's arrest." Officer Johnson's face grew even paler. "Sir, I haven't finished writing the report yet." "That's fine. I'll wait. But first, I want to hear the radio call about the robbery suspect." Sergeant Davis went to her computer and pulled up the police dispatch records. She read from the screen. "Robbery suspect last seen driving a blue Honda sedan, license plate number JBX4429, heading south on 5th Street. Marcus turned to his wife. "Sarah, what's your license plate number?" "MRT 7834, Sarah answered. Marcus looked back at the officers. "So you arrested my wife because she was driving a blue car, even though her license plate was completely different. From the suspect vehicle?" Officer Johnson tried to defend himself. "Sir, like I said, it was hard to see the plate clearly, and blue sedans are common cars used in crimes." "How many blue sedans do you think there are in this city?" Marcus asked. "Thousands? And you thought it was reasonable to arrest the driver of any blue sedan without checking basic details like the license plate?" Neither officer answered. Marcus continued his questioning. "Tell me about my wife's behavior during the stop. Was she violent? Did she try to run away? Did she threaten you in any way?" "No, sir," Officer Martinez admitted quietly. "Did she provide her license and registration when asked?" "Yes, sir." "Did she get out of the car when ordered?" "Yes, sir, but she kept asking questions." Marcus's voice grew harder. "What questions did she ask?" Officer Johnson shifted uncomfortably. "She wanted to know what robbery we were talking about. She wanted details about the suspect description. And you considered these unreasonable questions?" "She was challenging our authority, sir." Marcus stared at Officer Johnson for a long moment. "Officer, asking for information during a police stop is not challenging authority. It's exercising constitutional rights. Did you explain to my wife why she was being stopped?" "We told her the car matched a suspect description." "But you didn't tell her what the actual description was, did you?" Officer Johnson looked down at his feet. "No, sir." Marcus turned to Sergeant Davis. "I want the body camera footage from both officers pulled immediately. I also want a complete review of their recent arrest records." "Yes, sir," Sergeant Davis replied. "I'll get that started right away." Over the next hour, Marcus methodically reviewed everything about Sarah's arrest. The body camera footage clearly showed that Sarah had been polite and cooperative throughout the stop. It also showed that the officers had never properly explained why they stopped her or what specific robbery they were investigating. The footage revealed something even more troubling. Officer Johnson had been rude and aggressive from the very beginning of the stop. He had escalated the situation unnecessarily and had arrested Sarah simply because she asked questions about her rights. Marcus also discovered that this was not the first time Officer Johnson had made questionable arrests. In the past 6 months, he had arrested 3 other people for uncooperative behavior during traffic stops. All 3 cases had been dropped by the prosecutor's office for lack of evidence. Even more concerning, all of Officer Johnson's recent, questionable arrests had involved black drivers in the same neighborhood where Sarah was stopped. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was not good. Marcus called his supervisor at Internal Affairs to report what he had found. Within 2 hours, a full investigation team was at the police station. They interviewed Sarah, reviewed all the evidence, and began looking into Officer Johnson's recent arrest patterns. The investigation team also discovered that Officer Martinez had been present during 2 of Officer Johnson's other questionable arrests, but had never reported any concerns about his partner's behavior. This meant that Officer Martinez was also in trouble for failing to stop police misconduct. News reporters began arriving at the police station after someone tipped them off about the arrest of an internal affairs official's wife. Camera crews set up outside the building, and reporters started asking questions about police accountability and racial profiling. Sarah was finally released without any charges being filed. The prosecutor's office reviewed the case and determined that there was no evidence of any crime. The arrest had been completely unjustified from the beginning. As Marcus and Sarah left the police station together, they were met by reporters asking questions about what had happened. Marcus spoke briefly to the media, explaining that a full investigation was underway and that appropriate action would be taken. No citizen should be arrested for asking reasonable questions during a police stop, Marcus told the reporters. What happened to my wife tonight represents exactly the kind of police misconduct that Internal Affairs exists to investigate and prevent. Sarah stood next to her husband, grateful that the nightmare was over, but angry about what she had been put through. She thought about all the other people who might have experienced similar treatment from these officers, but did not have the resources or connections to fight back. The investigation was just beginning. But Sarah knew that Officer Johnson and Officer Martinez were about to face serious consequences for their actions. Their attempt to abuse their power had backfired in the worst possible way when they targeted the wife of the very person whose job it was to hold them accountable. 3 weeks after Sarah's arrest, the Internal Affairs investigation was complete. Marcus had stepped back from the case to avoid any conflict of interest, but his colleagues had done thorough work. What they found was worse than anyone had expected. The investigation team discovered that Officer Johnson had a pattern of targeting black drivers in traffic stops over the past 2 years. He had made over 30 questionable arrests, most of them for minor infractions or uncooperative behavior. Many of these cases had been dismissed by judges who found no evidence of actual crimes. Officer Martinez had been Johnson's partner for most of these arrests. While he had not actively participated in the misconduct, he had never reported his partner's behavior or tried to stop it. Under police department rules, officers have a duty to report misconduct by their colleagues. Martinez had failed in this duty repeatedly. The body camera footage from Sarah's arrest became key evidence in the case. It clearly showed that Sarah had been polite and cooperative throughout the entire encounter. It also showed Officer Johnson escalating the situation unnecessarily and arresting Sarah without proper cause. Even more damaging was the audio from the stop. The recording proved that Officer Johnson had never properly explained the robbery or suspect description to Sarah. When she asked reasonable questions about why she was being stopped, he had become angry and defensive instead of providing information. The investigation also revealed that the original robbery call had been very specific. The suspect was described as a young white male driving a blue Honda sedan with license plate JBX 4429. Sarah was a middle-aged black woman driving a blue Toyota sedan with license plate MRT 7834. There was no reasonable way that she could have matched the suspect description. Captain Williams, the head of Internal Affairs, called a press conference to announce the results of the investigation. Local news stations covered the story extensively, and it became a major topic of discussion in the community. Our investigation has revealed serious violations of department policy and citizens' constitutional rights, Captain Williams announced to the media. We have found evidence of racial profiling, false arrest, and failure to report misconduct. These actions do not represent the values of our police department, and we will take appropriate action. The consequences for Officer Johnson were severe. He was immediately terminated from the police force and lost his pension benefits. The district attorney's office also filed criminal charges against him for false imprisonment, filing false police reports, and violating civil rights under color of authority. If convicted on all charges, Officer Johnson could face up to 5 years in prison and substantial fines. He would also be permanently banned from working in law enforcement anywhere in the state. Officer Martinez received a 6-month suspension without pay and was demoted from his current rank. He was also required to complete extensive retraining on constitutional rights, proper arrest procedures, and the duty to report misconduct. His personnel file would permanently reflect his failure to stop his partner's illegal behavior. The police department implemented several new policies as a result of the investigation. All traffic stops would now require supervisory approval if they resulted in arrests for minor infractions or uncooperative behavior. Officers would also receive mandatory training on citizens' rights and proper de-escalation techniques. The department also created a new early warning system to identify officers who showed patterns of questionable arrests or excessive complaints from citizens. This system would flag officers like Johnson before their behavior escalated to criminal conduct. Sarah decided to file a civil lawsuit against the city and both officers for violating her constitutional rights. Her lawyer argued that she had suffered emotional distress, humiliation, and violation of her civil liberties. The case was settled out of court for a substantial amount that the city paid to avoid the negative publicity of a trial. Sarah used part of the settlement money to create a legal defense fund for other citizens who experienced police misconduct but could not afford lawyers. She wanted to make sure that other people would have resources to fight back against illegal arrests and police abuse. The story also led to broader changes in the community. A group of concerned citizens formed a civilian oversight board to review police conduct and make recommendations for policy changes. The board included community leaders, civil rights advocates, and ordinary citizens who wanted to ensure police accountability. Local civil rights organizations used Sarah's case as an example of why police reform was necessary. They organized community meetings to educate people about their rights during police encounters and how to report misconduct when it occurred. The case also sparked conversations about racial profiling in law enforcement. Community leaders pointed out that if Sarah had not been married to an internal affairs investigator, she might never have gotten justice. They emphasized that all citizens, regardless of their connections, deserved equal protection under the law. 6 months after the arrest, Officer Johnson pleaded guilty to the criminal charges against him. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to Sarah for the harm he had caused. During his sentencing hearing, he offered a brief apology, but Sarah felt it was too little, too late. Officer Martinez completed his retraining and returned to duty, but his career was effectively over. Other officers avoided working with him because they knew about his failure to stop misconduct. He eventually transferred to a desk job and never worked patrol again. The police chief used the case as a teaching moment for the entire department. At roll call meetings, he emphasized that every officer had a duty to uphold the law and protect citizens' rights, regardless of their race or background. He made it clear that misconduct would not be tolerated and that officers who failed to report wrongdoing would face serious consequences. Sarah returned to her job at the hospital and tried to move on with her life. But the experience had changed her. She became an advocate for police reform and spoke at community meetings about her experience. She wanted people to understand that police misconduct could happen to anyone, but that citizens had rights and resources to fight back. The neighborhood where Sarah was arrested also changed. Residents became more aware of police activity in their area and more willing to record encounters and speak up when they witnessed questionable behavior. Several neighbors testified in support of Sarah during the investigation, and their involvement helped ensure that justice was served. A year later, Sarah received a letter from a young black man who had been arrested by Officer Johnson 2 years earlier. The man had pleaded guilty to a minor charge rather than fight the case because he could not afford a lawyer. After learning about Sarah's case and the pattern of misconduct, he was able to have his conviction overturned and his record cleared. Stories like this reminded Sarah why her fight had been important. Officer Johnson and Officer Martinez had thought they could abuse their power without consequences. They had targeted someone they believed was powerless to fight back, but they had made a critical mistake in their choice of victim. The irony was not lost on anyone involved in the case. 2 police officers who thought they were above the law had arrested the wife of the very person whose job it was to investigate police misconduct. Their arrogance and prejudice had led them to make the worst possible choice of victim. Sarah often reflected on how differently things might have turned out if she had been anyone else. If she had not been married to Marcus, would the officers have faced any consequences at all? Would their pattern of misconduct have continued unchecked? These questions motivated Sarah to continue her advocacy work. She knew that justice should not depend on who you know or who you are married to. Every citizen deserved equal protection under the law, and every police officer should be held accountable for their actions. The case became a landmark example of how police accountability should work. It showed that even experienced officers could face serious consequences when they violated citizens' rights. It also demonstrated the importance of having strong oversight systems to investigate misconduct and protect the public. For Sarah and Marcus, the experience strengthened their commitment to justice and their belief in the importance of the work they both did. Sarah continued her work at the hospital, helping to heal people in her community. Marcus continued his work in internal affairs, making sure that police officers followed the law and respected citizens' rights. Together, they had turned a nightmare into a victory for justice and accountability. Their story became proof that, even when the system fails, determined people can fight back and create positive change.